Imagine moving into your dream home, 5 miles from Asheville, North Carolina, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, only to have a taser fired at your wife by a power-hungry HOA thug in khaki. That's the nightmare Michael Carter faced in Willow Creek, a so-called tranquil neighborhood where peace came with a price. The HOA, led by Margaret Maggie Hensley, ruled like a dictator in a floral blouse, her safety patrol stomping through the streets with fake badges and real tasers. They fined folks for grass over 3 inches, droned over backyards like it was a war zone, and turned a quiet suburb into a battlefield of fear. For Michael and his wife Jasmine, a retired Special Forces hero, it was supposed to be a fresh start, until Maggie's clipboard became a weapon. Want to see a black veteran take down a suburban tyrant? Keep watching. You won't believe what happens next. The air in Willow Creek still carried the sting of Maggie Hensley's iron grip, her safety patrol casting shadows longer than the Blue Ridge Mountains themselves. Michael Carter stood on his porch that first month, his coffee growing cold in his hands, watching as a khaki-clad officer measured their neighbor's mailbox with a tape measure. 2 inches too tall, apparently a crime in this suburban dystopia. He shook his head, muttering to himself about the absurdity of it all, but his wife Jasmine saw something different. She saw a battlefield, one she'd fought on before, not with clipboards and drones, but with real stakes, lives, honor, and the kind of freedom Maggie could never understand. At 40 years old, Jasmine Carter was a force of nature, a black woman who'd spent 15 years in special forces, staring down enemies in deserts and jungles, her 5 feet 8 inches frame a testament to resilience forged in fire. Her deep brown eyes held stories Michael could only imagine, stories of missions where a single misstep meant no coming home, no more sunrises over the North Carolina hills. Jasmine had laughed the first time a citation appeared on their door, a flimsy piece of paper accusing her matte black Ford Bronco of disrupting community aesthetics. Michael had chuckled too, thinking it was just a petty annoyance, something to shrug off over dinner. But Jasmine's laugh wasn't one of amusement. It was the kind of laugh that echoed with the weight of 1,000 battles, a laugh that said, "I've seen worse, and I've won." She took the notice, her calloused fingers tracing the words, and filed it in a binder she labeled Willow Creek Nonsense. Michael watched her that evening, sitting at their oak dining table, her movements precise, her focus unshakable. "You're not really keeping that, are you?" he'd asked, half joking. Jasmine looked up, her gaze steady, and said, "Every war starts with intel, Michael." "This is mine." Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a woman who'd once talked down a warlord with nothing but a wristwatch and a prayer. As the days turned into weeks, Jasmine's binder grew thicker, a silent testament to the HOA's overreach. She'd walk the neighborhood at dawn, her sneakers hitting the pavement, with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, her eyes scanning every detail. The drones buzzing 20 feet above Mrs. Thompson's backyard, the safety patrol's flashlight beams slicing through the pre-dawn mist, the way Todd Bradley smirked as he slapped a fine on a kid's lemonade stand for unpermitted commerce. She didn't confront them, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she watched, her calm a storm waiting to break. Michael saw the change in her, the way her shoulders squared a little more each day, the way her hands moved with purpose as she jotted down timestamps in her notebook. 6:02 a.m., drone spotted, 7:15 a.m., patrol car parked 10 yards from the park. "You're planning something, aren't you?" he asked one evening, his voice tinged with both awe and worry. Jasmine smiled, a small, knowing smile that made his heart ache with pride. "I'm just watching, Michael," she said. "They're not ready for me yet." But Jasmine was more than a watcher. She was a protector, a guardian of the peace she'd fought for overseas and now sought in Willow Creek. She'd retired to this quiet suburb for a reason, to build a life with Michael, to wake up to the sound of birds instead of gunfire, to plant a garden where her grandkids could one day play. Yet here she was, pulled back into a fight she didn't ask for, her past whispering in every citation, every drone, every smug glance from Maggie Hensley. She thought of her team, the brothers and sisters who'd had her back in the darkest moments, and she knew they'd have hers now. As she sat on their porch swing one evening, the binder open on her lap, the Blue Ridge Mountains glowing gold in the sunset, Jasmine felt a fire rekindle in her chest. This wasn't just about her Bronco or her pride. It was about the soul of Willow Creek, a community suffocating under Maggie's reign. And Jasmine Carter, with her steady hands and unyielding heart, was ready to take it back. The first strike came swiftly. A citation slapped on the Carter's door for the Bronco's militaristic appearance, as if a car could wage war on Maggie's precious aesthetic. Michael laughed it off, but Jasmine's jaw tightened, her fingers tracing the paper with a soldier's precision. She filed it away, her silence louder than any protest. But Maggie wasn't done. The safety patrol, led by Todd Bradley, a stocky man with a permanent scowl and a fake badge pinned to his khaki vest, began their campaign of harassment. One morning, as Jasmine tended to her rose garden 10 feet from the driveway, Todd marched up, a tape measure in hand, and began measuring the Bronco's tire tread depth, muttering about potential violations. Jasmine looked up, her brown eyes narrowing, and said, "You done playing soldier, Todd?" He froze, his face reddening, then stormed off, but not before leaving another citation for obstructing a safety inspection. Michael watched from the porch, his heart sinking. "They're not going to stop, are they?" he asked. Jasmine shook her head, her voice low but steady. "Not until I make them." The harassment escalated, each incident a dagger aimed at Jasmine's pride. The safety patrol parked their car 15 yards from the Carter's house at odd hours, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness like searchlights in a prison yard. They fined a neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, for her birdhouse being too reflective under the streetlights. The $50 penalty, a cruel blow to a widow living on a fixed income. Jasmine found Mrs. Ellis crying on her porch, her hands trembling as she clutched the citation. "I can't afford this," she'd whispered, her voice breaking. Jasmine knelt beside her, her own heart aching with a fury she hadn't felt since her days in the field. "You won't have to," she promised, her words a vow etched in steel. That night she added Mrs. Ellis's story to her binder, her pen moving with the precision of a sniper lining up a shot. Maggie, emboldened by her unchecked power, took things further. At an HOA meeting in the community center, 2 miles from the Carter's home, she stood at the podium, her floral blouse a mockery of the venom in her words. "We must protect our community's harmony," she declared, her voice shrill as she banged her gavel. "I propose a new policy: no vehicles with a militaristic appearance or aggressive displays of force on residential property." The room fell silent, the unspoken target clear to everyone. Jasmine's Bronco. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to Jasmine, who sat in the back, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Michael, sitting beside her, felt his stomach churn. "They're coming for you," he whispered. Jasmine nodded, her gaze fixed on Maggie. "Let them try," she said, her voice a quiet thunder that sent a shiver down Michael's spine. The neighborhood simmered under Maggie's reign, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The safety patrol's drones buzzed over backyards, their cameras glinting 20 feet above like vultures circling prey. They fined a father for his kids' chalk drawings on a sidewalk 50 feet from the park, calling it vandalism, and left cryptic notes on doors. "Your porch light exceeds lumen limits." Jasmine watched it all, her binder now a tome of injustice, each page a testament to the HOA's tyranny. She knew Maggie's fear of her was growing, a fear that made her reckless, and Jasmine was ready to use that against her. As she stood on her porch one evening, the Blue Ridge Mountains a dark silhouette against the twilight sky, Jasmine felt the weight of her past and the fire of her purpose. Maggie thought she was winning, but she didn't know the first rule of war. Never underestimate a soldier who's already survived hell. The tension in Willow Creek had reached a boiling point, a simmering rage that pulsed beneath the surface of every manicured lawn and HOA-approved mailbox. Jasmine Carter had watched Maggie Hensley's reign of terror grow bolder, her safety patrol's harassment a daily assault on the neighborhood's soul. But on Memorial Day, as the Blue Ridge Mountains stood sentinel over the Carter's 1-acre backyard, Jasmine decided it was time to draw a line in the sand. She parked her matte black Ford Bronco on the street, 5 feet from an HOA sign that read, Community standards matter. Its gleaming hood a silent challenge to Maggie's tyranny. As a final act of defiance, she placed a small American flag on the dashboard, a symbol of the freedom she'd fought for overseas, and the freedom she'd fight for now. Michael watched her from the porch, his heart swelling with pride but heavy with worry. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine turned, her brown eyes glinting with a fire he hadn't seen since her military days. "I've never been more sure," she said, her words a promise that sent a shiver down his spine. The Memorial Day cookout was meant to be a balm for Willow Creek's wounds, a chance for neighbors to gather on the Carters' sprawling lawn. The scent of charcoal and grilled burgers, mingling with the laughter of children riding bikes 20 yards down the street. The elderly couple next door, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, brought their famous potato salad, their smiles a rare sight after months of HOA fines for their non-compliant porch swing. Mrs. Ellis, the widow Jasmine had comforted, sat in a lawn chair, her eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks, a glass of lemonade in her hand. Michael flipped burgers on the grill, the sizzle a comforting rhythm, while Jasmine moved through the crowd with a quiet grace, handing out juice boxes to kids and sharing a knowing nod with neighbors who'd whispered their HOA horror stories to her. For a moment it felt like the Willow Creek of their dreams, a community bound by shared meals and shared hope, not fear. But peace in Willow Creek was a fragile thing, and Maggie's safety patrol was never far behind. Around 3 p.m., as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the backyard, Michael spotted them, 3 khaki-clad officers marching down the sidewalk like they were storming a battlefield. Todd Bradley led the charge, his scowl etched deeper than ever, a handheld radio clutched in his hand like a grenade. One officer carried a citation pad, another a phone to record their operation, their fake badges glinting in the sunlight. Michael's stomach dropped, his spatula slipping from his hand. "They're here," he whispered to Jasmine, who was setting out plates 10 feet away. She didn't flinch, didn't even look up. She just nodded, her movements deliberate, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. Todd stopped at the edge of the Carters' property, his eyes locking onto the Bronco. "This vehicle is in direct violation of Willow Creek Regulation 14.2.5, he barked, his voice carrying over the hum of the cookout. The music stopped, the laughter died, and every eye turned to the unfolding drama. Jasmine stepped forward, her arms crossed, her stance unyielding. "Which part?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with steel. "The freedom or the horsepower?" Todd's mouth twitched, his hand hovering over his utility belt. The other 2 officers shifted nervously, but Todd doubled down, pulling out a laminated warning card and holding it up like a warrant. "This is your final notification," he said, stepping closer. "Failure to relocate this non-compliant vehicle will result in forced removal by the authority granted to the Willow Creek HOA Board and its appointed safety patrol." The air grew thick, the tension a living thing that wrapped around every guest like a vice. Mr. Harper clutched his wife's hand, his knuckles white, while Mrs. Ellis whispered a prayer under her breath. Michael took a step forward, his heart pounding, but Jasmine held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "You want to move it," she said, her voice a low growl that echoed with the weight of her past. "You'll have to go through me." Todd's eyes narrowed, his hand moving to the taser on his belt. "You are interfering with a lawful citation process," he snapped. "Step aside, or we will use non-lethal force to neutralize the threat to community order." A gasp rippled through the crowd, a child's cry piercing the silence. Michael's blood ran cold, his mind screaming for someone to stop this madness, but there was no time. With a sudden jerk, Todd yanked the taser free, aimed it at Jasmine, and fired. The prong shot out, striking her in the chest, and she dropped to the ground like a felled oak, her body hitting the grass with a sickening thud. Michael froze, his breath caught in his throat, the spatula clattering to the ground. "Jasmine!" he shouted, his voice raw with terror, but the world seemed to slow, the sounds of the cookout fading into a distant hum. The neighbors gasped, some covering their mouths, others clutching their children, their faces pale with shock. Todd stood there, the taser still in his hand, a flicker of triumph in his eyes until the real show began. One by one, red laser dots appeared on Todd's khaki vest, then his arms, his neck, glowing like embers in the fading light. They weren't toys, not party decorations. These were military grade, sharp and precise, a silent judgment from the universe itself. From the tree line 30 yards away, from a second-story window across the street, from behind the corner fence, Jasmine's former Special Forces team emerged like ghosts, their movements silent, their faces unreadable. Michael counted 5 of them, each one armed, each one a predator, watching a deer stumble into a trap. Todd's face drained of color, his hand trembling as he dropped the taser, his knees buckling under the weight of his mistake. The other 2 officers stepped back, their citation pad and phone forgotten, their bravado evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Jasmine rolled over, pushing herself up on one arm, her breath steady despite the taser wires dangling from her shirt. She opened her eyes, a smirk playing on her lips, and looked at Todd with a gaze that could shatter stone. "You need to recalibrate your aim," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. That shot was low and left. The collective gasp from the neighbors turned to a stunned silence, then a ripple of nervous laughter. She stood, brushing off her pants with a soldier's nonchalance, and yanked the wires from her shirt like they were nothing more than loose threads. Michael's heart pounded, a mix of relief and awe washing over him as he realized what had just happened. This wasn't a defeat, it was a setup, and Jasmine had been in control the whole time. Jasmine Carter had always been a woman of action, a quiet force who moved with purpose and precision. But behind the calm demeanor she presented to her neighbors, a storm was brewing. A storm that would sweep Maggie Hensley and her safety patrol from Willow Creek and restore peace to the community. For weeks, Jasmine had been preparing, laying the groundwork for her ultimate victory, and now the pieces were falling into place. It wasn't just about fighting back with force. Jasmine knew better than anyone that the key to winning a battle was always intelligence, gathering the right information, making the right moves, and waiting for the perfect moment. The HOA had underestimated her. They had assumed she would be another easy target, a woman in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a dark past they couldn't comprehend. But they didn't know Jasmine. They didn't know the soldier who had survived insurgent attacks in deserts, the strategist who had planned operations that spanned continents. Maggie and her safety patrol thought they could intimidate her with their clipboards and citations, but Jasmine had learned long ago that real power didn't come from the visible, it came from the invisible. And that was exactly what she was building. Every morning before the sun rose, Jasmine was already on the streets of Willow Creek. She didn't walk, she surveyed. She walked with purpose, moving like a chess player, studying the board, taking in every detail, how the drones flew overhead, how the patrol parked just a little too close to certain houses, how Maggie always took the same route to her offices. It was during these pre-dawn hours that Jasmine became a ghost, unnoticed by those who were too busy following their own rules to notice her. Her neighbors still thought she was just the retired Army officer next door, a quiet woman with a big SUV. But to the HOA, she was a looming threat, a shadow they couldn't quite place. Jasmine had already begun collecting evidence. Hundreds of photos, videos, and time-stamped notes documenting the HOA's overreach, the illegal fines, and the constant harassment. Her binder, once just a collection of silly citations and absurd infractions, had transformed into a detailed dossier of misconduct. Every drone that buzzed by her backyard, every illegal citation handed out by Todd Bradley, every suspicious action by the safety patrol, it was all recorded. But it wasn't just about the physical evidence. Jasmine's mind was a weapon, and she was honing it, sharpening her strategy. She knew the HOA's weaknesses. She knew their fear. And most importantly, she knew that Maggie Hensley, for all her bluster, wasn't prepared for a fight like the one Jasmine was about to bring. As she sat at the small oak desk in her kitchen one evening, the light from a single lamp casting shadows across the room, Jasmine sifted through her binder one last time. Each page turned with a crisp snap, a physical marker of the work she'd put in. She glanced at the video footage she had collected, tapes of safety patrol vehicles parked too close to private properties, drones violating privacy laws, and even Maggie's frequent visits to her office without proper authorization. It wasn't just about fighting the HOA on the surface. It was about dismantling their foundation piece by piece. Jasmine had meticulously organized her strategy. She had already reached out to a few key neighbors, the ones who had long been afraid to speak up against Maggie's regime. These were people like Mrs. Ellis, the widow, and Mr. Harper, the elderly neighbor who had been fined for a porch swing that had been a part of his home for decades. She was organizing a quiet uprising, gathering those who had suffered under Maggie's rule, and turning them into witnesses for the battle to come. But even more importantly, Jasmine had been in touch with a former colleague from her Special Forces days, Agent Brooks. She had worked alongside him on covert operations, and he had always respected her keen sense of justice. He was now a federal agent in charge of investigating HOA corruption across the country. Jasmine had sent him an anonymous tip months ago, but now she was preparing to make the final call. She needed him to step in, to bring the weight of the law down on Maggie and her petty reign. She couldn't do it alone, and she knew that Maggie's influence reached too far for her to take down the HOA without a fight. But with federal intervention, everything would change. The phone call with Agent Brooks was brief but purposeful. Jasmine didn't need to say much. She trusted him to understand the gravity of the situation. "It's time," she said, her voice steady and calm, betraying none of the storm inside her. "Maggie Hensley's reign of terror ends now. The evidence is there. All you have to do is pull the trigger." As the night stretched on, Jasmine looked at the binder once more, her eyes scanning the words she had written. The papers were more than just documents. They were the blueprint for the end of Maggie's tyranny. And when the time came, Jasmine would use them, along with her team, to bring down the safety patrol once and for all. In the days that followed, Jasmine's movements became even more deliberate. She continued to watch, continued to gather intel, but now she was also preparing herself for the final confrontation. She couldn't afford to be seen as a victim anymore. She had to be seen as a leader, a protector of the community. As the days crept closer to the cookout, where the safety patrol would inevitably confront her, Jasmine's focus never wavered. She was preparing not just for a confrontation with the HOA, but for the moment when she would finally take back control of Willow Creek. The sun had barely set the evening before the cookout when Jasmine stood on her porch, the last slivers of daylight casting long shadows over the lawn. She watched as her neighbors trickled out, each one uncertain of what would happen next, but each one holding on to the faint hope that Jasmine's quiet strength would be enough. She felt the weight of that hope, but it didn't make her nervous. It made her more determined. This wasn't just about her. This was about them. The people who had suffered in silence, who had been beaten down by the same system that was now trying to break her. Jasmine took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the street ahead. The final pieces were in place. The storm was coming, and she would be the one to guide Willow Creek through it. The morning after the cookout, Willow Creek awoke to the sound of birdsong and the murmur of neighbors slowly returning to normal life. But beneath the calm, there was an undercurrent of change. Maggie Hensley's safety patrol had made their move, but it wasn't the power play they had hoped for. It was a desperate last stand. Jasmine Carter, the quiet warrior, had already taken back control of the neighborhood, and now federal agents were on their way to finish what Jasmine had started. By noon, the streets of Willow Creek were quieter than usual. Neighbors peered cautiously through their windows, wondering if they had imagined the events of the day before. The flash of laser sights, the taser shot, the calm resolve of a woman who had once fought on battlefields far away. And then, as if a dam had broken, a convoy of black SUVs rolled into town, their engines cutting through the still air. Agent Brooks, a tall man with graying hair and a look of quiet authority, stepped out of the lead vehicle. His gaze was as steady as his walk, and as soon as his boots hit the pavement, he moved toward the Carter's house without a single word spoken. Jasmine had been waiting for this moment, sitting on her porch with a knowing smile. She didn't need to say anything. She had known Agent Brooks would come through. She stood and watched as he approached, his hand reaching for the files in his briefcase, the weight of justice about to come crashing down on Maggie and her reign of terror. Agent Brooks didn't need introductions. Everyone in Willow Creek had heard the whispers of federal intervention, of the investigation into HOA corruption that had been quietly building in the background. For months, Jasmine had been preparing the evidence, witness testimonies, Video footage of illegal fines, photos of safety patrol abuse, and every single violation that Maggie Hensley and her crew had ignored. Now it was all about to be laid bare for the world to see. Maggie Hensley wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't anticipated that someone like Jasmine would be able to outsmart her. She had assumed her power was absolute, that the HOA's grip on Willow Creek was unshakable. But as she stood in her pristine office, the phone ringing incessantly, Maggie's world began to crumble. Her eyes widened when she saw the flashing lights of the convoy outside her window. The door to her office slammed open, and there stood Agent Brooks, followed by two federal agents who moved with the precision of soldiers. Without hesitation, they read her rights, their voices firm and authoritative. "What's the meaning of this?" Maggie sputtered, her voice trembling as she stood to confront the agents. But it was too late. She could feel the weight of the evidence behind her, the entire case against her laid out in undeniable detail. "You've been caught in the act, Maggie," Agent Brooks said, his tone as cold as the steel of the cuffs that now encircled her wrists. "You and your safety patrol are under arrest for abuse of power, illegal fines, and harassment of residents. This is over." For the first time in years, Maggie Hensley felt the crushing weight of fear. The woman who had once been the uncontested ruler of Willow Creek was now nothing more than a criminal in the eyes of the law. Her dreams of control shattered in an instant, and as the agents escorted her from her office, Maggie's gaze met the eyes of the neighbors who had gathered outside, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had all been waiting for this moment, the moment when their voices were finally heard, when justice was served. Jasmine watched the scene unfold from her porch, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over her. This was the moment she had been working toward, a moment not just for herself, but for every single neighbor who had suffered under Maggie's oppressive rule. And yet, there was no triumph in her eyes, no gloating, only the calm knowledge that she had done what needed to be done. As Agent Brooks and his team left the neighborhood, the community began to come alive again. Neighbors who had kept their heads down for too long now stepped into the light, their faces full of gratitude. Mrs. Ellis, who had been the first to feel the weight of Maggie's injustice, walked over to Jasmine with a small bouquet of flowers in hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given us all our lives back." Jasmine accepted the flowers with a simple nod, her heart heavy with the realization that this victory wasn't just about taking down an HOA. It was about restoring the dignity and freedom of an entire community. A community that had been silenced and now finally had a voice. As the sun began to set behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, the residents of Willow Creek gathered once more on Jasmine's lawn, their voices filled with laughter and celebration. The streets that had once been filled with tension now buzzed with life, as neighbors shared stories of their struggles and their newfound hope. And in the midst of it all, Jasmine stood quietly at the center, a protector, a leader, and a symbol of the strength that had saved Willow Creek from the brink of tyranny. The dust had finally settled in Willow Creek. Maggie Hensley's grip on the neighborhood had shattered, her arrest just the beginning of the community's healing. The HOA, once a domineering force, crumbled in the wake of Jasmine Carter's quiet revolution. For years, Maggie had run the show with fear and manipulation. But now, the very system that had terrorized the residents was dismantling piece by piece, and the streets once under siege by drones and patrol cars were now filled with laughter, conversation, and a deep, collective sense of relief. Jasmine stood at the heart of it all. She hadn't sought out leadership. It had come to her naturally, like a current pulling her forward. When the community gathered to vote on the new president of the HOA, there was no contest. Jasmine had already proven herself as the one person willing to fight for their freedom, to defend their rights without hesitation. As the votes were counted, the weight of what was happening settled in. She wasn't just a neighbor anymore. She was their leader, their voice in a world that had long silenced them. When the results were announced, there was no loud fanfare, no parade. It was a quiet, reverent moment, one where Jasmine's eyes met Michael's across the crowd. He had been her unwavering support, her rock through all the chaos, and now he stood beside her as the entire neighborhood recognized her for the strength they had all seen. His proud smile was all the affirmation she needed. "Thank you," Jasmine said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Thank you for trusting me, for standing up, and for believing that together we could take our home back." The crowd erupted into applause, but it wasn't just about her victory. It was about what she had done for them. She had given them back their voices, their dignity, and the promise of a future where their community could flourish without the shadow of fear hanging over them. Willow Creek was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a place reborn, its residents free to live without the oppressive gaze of an HOA that had no place in their lives. And at the center of it all, Jasmine Carter stood as a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, one person's determination could change everything. In The Reckoning at Willow Creek, the story of Jasmine Carter's stand against the oppressive HOA conveys powerful lessons about courage, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what is right. It reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, one person's determination can spark a wave of change. The story also emphasizes the need for community and solidarity. When individuals come together with a shared purpose, they can overcome fear and injustice. For older generations, this narrative offers a reminder of the importance of never backing down when something is wrong, even if it feels like the system is stacked against you. It is never too late to take action, to lead, or to make a difference. Jasmine's story is a testament to the fact that standing up for what you believe in can inspire others and create lasting change in your community. As you reflect on this story, consider how you can apply its lessons to your own life. Whether it's standing up for a neighbor, protecting your rights, or simply having the courage to speak out when something is unjust, remember that your voice matters. Don't let fear keep you silent. In your own way, you can be the change Willow Creek needs. Stand up, speak out, and lead by example. Your actions can inspire generations to come.